So before starting my presentation, Ash Agnick said that it's history, and anything said or done cannot justify this personality that we'll be talking about today, Kuyili. All right. So I wanted to start with something really crazy, maybe just an idea of naming history to her story, because that's what we've been growing up with, telling people that, oh, it's his story, and that's how the subject name came in, history, right? So I thought, just why not go for a wordplay and start with her story, because we're going to talk about a woman. So it just made sense, right? Starting with her story, Kuyili, let's understand first of all little about her background. Just a second. Great. So Kuyili, as Shagnik also mentioned, was addressed by different names, some as the brave commander or Veeramangai, the brave woman, right? Also, apologies for any pronunciation mistakes during the time, because I'm really unfamiliar with a lot of names because they have a southern origin and not fluent with that language, all right? So, yes, moving on. Kuyili was born to Muthan and Raku. A little background of her parents as well, because uh, it also played a huge role in how Kuyili went ahead and what she did in her life as a personality, as a woman, etc. So her parents, Muthan and Raku, as said, were normal farmers. Like they used to work on fields, they had their normal routine going on until one day what happened was Raku, the mother, Kuyili's mother, saw that there was this wild bull that attacked their fields. And within a blink of an eye, she rushed to protect and save her crops, save the fields, while Kuyili was still very young. So Kuyili actually saw her mother Raku fight that bull. A lot of other villagers also saw her mother Raku fight that bull in middle of that field in broad daylight. And during this process, sadly, she did die in an attempt to like save the fields. But what did happen was it left a very great impact on Kuyili as to the courage that she inherited from her mother, because she grew up seeing that her mother did not hesitate for a moment to just go ahead and protect what she thought that was hers, right? Her to protect. So at that point of time, after her mother's death, her father Priyamutham, he went ahead and he did not necessarily went ahead with the idea of going like staying in the same place that her mother died. So he shifted and he went ahead and got to Sivaganga, which will play a very important role in Kuyili's life. He worked in Sivaganga as a cobbler, and it was during this time that he met Velu Nachiar. Now, Velu Nachiar also has a history, which we'll discuss in very brief in the next few slides. But before that, it is important to understand that Piriyamuthan worked as a spy under Velu Nachiar. So that is how Kuyili also came in contact with Velu Nachiar, because her father was a spy who used to work under Velu Nachiar. Right? Before moving on any further, I wanted to be very specific as to what the presentation will be about before we get to the climax of the presentation. And why is it that I chose Kuyili as the figure that I wanted to talk about? Firstly, because it did satisfy the name of the series that we are going ahead with, that she is not known, she's hardly recognized, and thus hidden in plain sight is one thing that has come up with such personalities. And I thought that, yes, why not? But the second reason is why I chose Kuyili was of the underrepresentation of women figures in Indian history, about how a lot of times we see that women are not represented in history that well. Right now, we have a lot of gender studies that are coming up, and we see the role of women. But I still feel that it is more of a supplementary than a main case scenario. Like we'll study some male figure and male counterparts, and then we'll just study in brief about the women counterparts in that exact moment. And to eradicate that underrepresentation, I thought, why not go for a women figure? But thirdly, that she was a woman in heavily patriarchal times. Like all all the women here will understand what I'm talking about when I say that it's how it's so much more difficult for women in general to go ahead and achieve something from their lives, um, because we live in a patriarchal society. And that was very clear from the start of this presentation, how she grew up seeing her mother defy all sorts of norms that are associated with women. She fought a bull. Then she grew up herself, and then she instead of became a warrior. So she defied all norms. And thirdly is that there's a lot of propaganda also that is associated with. Oh, I'm sorry. What happened? I'll just share my screen again. Just a second. It's visible, right? Could anybody confirm if my screen is visible? Just a yes or a no. Thank
Yes,
you.
it's visible.
Thank you. So yes, there's a lot of propaganda that is also associated with Kuyili because of the controversy she is drenched in. And we'll talk about that in the later half of the presentation. Moving on, let's start from how it all began, right? So in 1772, the MP Udaya Thevar who was the second king of Sivaganga state, who was also the husband of Velu Nachiar at that time, was embroiled in a war with the Nawab of Arcot, right? And it is important to understand why is it that at the end of the day they even lost, right? The first is that there was a direct involvement of the British troops who were fighting wars for the Nawab through a very strategic partnership. And at the end of the day, British, of course, did have a very like advanced weapons, etc., etc., organized army, and combine that with the Nawab of Arcot's army. The Sivaganga state and Thevar did not stand a chance in front of them, and that is how it just required two British officers and a few of other like British army to go ahead and plunder the entire Sivaganga state. They attacked it, ravaged it, and it was during this time that Thevar died shortly after, right? All this while, Velu Nachiar did not get a chance to do anything, and all she could do at that possible time was to flee away from that situation. So she escaped to Dindigul, which is under Hyder Ali at that time. So Velu Nachiar was in protection of Hyder Ali when the British attacked the Sivaganga state. All this while, when she was away from the Sivaganga state, she started to form or reform her army again, right? Because since the village was plundered and the state was plundered, she did not have a lot of human resource at that time as well. So her time in Dindigul was devoted to forming an army so that she could go back, regain the fort that she and her husband lost to the Britishers. And it is during this time that Renu Velu Nachiar and Kuyili became really close. And this is because of this bond that we'll see how loyal Kuyili as a commander was to Velu Nachiar. So there have been various instances wherein Kuyili saved the queen's life, more than one occasion actually. So there was this instance wherein an intruder came in while Velu Nachiar was sleeping in her camp, and the intruder tried to attack Velu Nachiar, only to see that Kuyili was right there, and Kuyili fought that intruder. She was badly injured in the process, but it did not matter at that time because she actually held that intruder and did not let go of. So this was the first time that she saved Velu
Khushi,
Nachiar's
I think
life.
you're not audible.
Could anybody else confirm?
Khushi is audible. Khushi is audible. You're audible.
Okay.
I
Maybe
think Tejasvi,
Tejasvi,
there
there
would
is
be
a
something from your side, right?
network issue from your end. All right. So this is the first instance. The second was regarding the syllabum teacher. So syllabum is basically a weapon-based martial art it's still practiced in a lot of places in the south. And Kuyili used to take the practice this art of syllabum. She had a syllabum teacher, and it is then that she discovered that the syllabum teacher of hers was a spy who was working against Velu Nachiar. So he was plotting with the opposition powers, uh, combining their powers together to fight Velu Nachiar, and because they knew that Velu Nachiar at the end of the day will go ahead and would want to take back that their fort. And as soon as she made discovery of this fact that her syllabum teacher is actually a spy, she ended his life there and then. So you see how her loyalty was on such an extreme end that her own syllabum teacher, who she used to learn this art form from, with this martial art from, it did not take a second for her to go ahead and put his life to an end. Right? This was the second instance. And when Velu Nachiar came to know about this fact, she made Kuyili her personal bodyguard. This was the first major impression that Kuyili left in Velu Nachiar's life, wherein she was made her personal bodyguard. At the end, the major event that led her to the position of the commander of the army of Velu Nachiar uh, was that she had a confrontation with the Britishers. What actually happened was, given the close bond Kuyili and Velu Nachiar shared, the Britishers approached her once and coerced Kuyili into revealing information about Velu Nachiar because she was her personal bodyguard. So it only made sense for the Britishers to go ahead and capture somebody who would be so close to Velu Nachiar that they'd be willing to exchange any information. Except they didn't know that Kuyili is not one such person. Kuyili is very loyal to Rani Velu Nachiar, and she did not come into their coercion. She did not reveal anything about Velu Nachiar. And it is said, however, there are not enough instances or evidences to prove this fact, but it is said that because of this, um, because Kuyili did not reveal any information, the community she belonged to and her people were tortured by Britishers. However, there's no fact, but this it becomes important to understand that her community was tortured, to also understand the controversy that will emerge literally decades and decades after it, right? So we'll just leave it to that as of now. Coming to this fact, Velu Nachiar grew her, like she saw how Kuyili and her people maybe would have been tortured, and that is why she made Kuyili her commander of the army, right? And to show her support to Kuyili and the people and the community she belonged to, she made Kuyili the commander of her army. This is what we know about the bond of Rani Velu Nachiar and Kuyili. Let's talk about the D-Day, when things actually happened. Why is that she's regarded as such an amazing martyr? Why is it that she's regarded as the first case of suicide bombing, so to say, right? The first is the a case of Vijay Dashmi, that is the D-Day. What actually happened was, once the army was collected, they chose a particular day, which was the day of Vijay Dashmi, because there would have been, the fort was decorated and there were people who were coming to visit the temple of Raja Rajeswari Amman inside the fort. There were a lot of women who used to dress up, carry flower baskets, fruit basket, transport all that stuff from the market to the fort. And in disguise, all these women, the army of Velu Nachiar, they disguised themselves. They put in a lot of weapons and artillery and all of those things inside flower and fruit baskets, and they entered the fort. This is how they entered the fort. And all this while, the Britishers did not have a single clue, right? Moving on, how did then things take place? So once all of these things started to grow, the Britishers did develop a little suspicion over the weird things that were happening inside the fort, such as so much, like so many people. There was a lot of crowd, and the situations became really really chaotic. And during this time, that like one of the British soldiers recognized that, oh, this is not a flower basket, this has weapons in it. And soon there were like the Velu Nachiar's army who were fighting the Britishers, and there was a huge chaos at that time. What in Amidst this chaos, what was Kuyili doing? Kuyili already made note of the storage area. She was very well versed with the fort anyway. She made note of the storage area, and by the storage area, I mean where the Britishers stored all their weapons, where they had all their artillery and all those things that they could use for possibly for fighting, right? If an intruder comes in. And she made of note of that storage area. She made her comrades pour ghee and oil over her, and then she went inside the storage area and set herself on fire. This is what she did again without any hesitation. The valor, the courage it takes to even think for a person to end their life in an instant because they know that this is something goal that they have achieved. This is the storage area of the Britishers, and once the Britishers have access to their weapons, it is over for the Velu Nachiar's army. And that is what she did. She destroyed all the weapons. She left the British army completely vulnerable. At that moment, the Velu Nachiar and her army, they won the battle and they reclaimed her fort and her kingdom. This is exactly where Kuyili ended her life, again, for to show her loyalty to the Rani, to Velu Nachiar. um, at the end of the day, one might wonder why is that such a great warrior even has a controversy. What possibly can be one thing that makes her controversial, right? Except the biggest controversy here is that maybe Kuyili was a fictional figure. That's that's it. That is the controversy, that people believe it is a fictional figure. But what is more interesting is to note here that for decades and decades, people used to believe that yes, there was this person Kuyili, and there was she belonged to this particular community. Except in 2014, a particular CM from Tamil Nadu went ahead to go like commemorate this to glorify Kuyili. She went ahead with a memorial, and it is only then the opposition powers went ahead to say no, this is wrong. I mean, Kuyili did not belong to this particular community because she belonged to a scheduled caste community. People opposition from the particular party went ahead to say this is for vote bank, this is not something, this is not history, and she was a fictional figure, and that she never really existed. It was Velu Nachiar, and of course she had a women army, but we cannot be sure of Kuyili. And before that, Kuyili was mentioned in the syllabus, a lot of textbooks that children used to read in down south, and it was mentioned and it was read out in homes and to children. They used to grow up listening to the brave-hearted Kuyili. And in 2014, because of the commemoration of that memorial, people thought, oh, maybe she's not real at the end of the day because it's just party politics. And which at the end of the day brings me to my second point, how history and politics have in the recent decades in itself have become so important and essential to understand, right? How there have been constant reinterpretations of history with changing political parties, etc., etc. And these have sparked debates. After 2014, there were a lot of debates as to whether it's just because that her community, like to gain the votes of her community, that Kuyili, was commemorated, or whether is it that she actually existed. Whatever the case, because of the lack of evidences, we cannot be really sure of what exactly put up to, like what actually to believe. But a lot of British records do mention of a woman commander of army. She was a woman commander of army, etc., etc. Talking about the remembrance that I just mentioned, it is the government of Tamil Nadu commemorated a memorial to glorify the bravery of Kuyili. This is currently located in the Sivaganga district in Tamil Nadu. So whoever is interested to understand, sure, go ahead, visit Tamil Nadu. That wraps up my presentation for today. I hope that I was able to shed some light on not just Kuyili and her personality and what she did, on how she did basically, but also on some fallacies or some other debates that happen to be a part of history. Maybe it's influenced by politics, and maybe it's just a lot of interpolations, a work of later interpolations that we do have to take in account all these factors when we go ahead and form our opinions, because they have the capability to shape in what kind of history we're studying and in what kind of history we're going ahead and pursuing and teaching others. Thank you for being an amazing audience. I'll hand over to Shaknik. Thank you.
Uh, that was a really great and insightful presentation, Khushi. And I'm not saying this because that's what I prepared for saying, but I genuinely mean it. Well, moving onwards to the Q&A session, if anyone has any questions about this presentation, they can put in their questions in the chat box. So go ahead if you have any questions. Uh, and in the meantime, if anyone is writing any questions, Khushi, I want to ask you something about Kuyili. So, based on your understanding of this person, what would you say is like the one thing that you like the most about her and the one thing that you feel should be criticized? Because like no historical figure can be perfect, right? So would be your answer.
Um, as of now, I don't think that I have a lot of criticism on Kohli because, firstly, not because the great personality, or not just because of the great personality and the aura she had with her, but also of the little we know about her. I mean, we just know literally the basic of any other person that we might come across, right? We just know of her parents, of the broad headlines, the relationship with Velu Nachiar, only because we know of Velu Nachiar is because why we know of Kuyili, right? Because we know a person who was maybe considered superior. She was the Rani of the Sivaganga state. And that is why we know, oh, she was the commander under some Rani. That's how for the longest time Kuyili was seen as. So I'm not sure of the criticism, but yes, if one thing that I've learned from her is that there's never the spontaneity in her actions at the dire times, right? When she discovered that her syllabum teacher is a traitor, all her feelings for right, for a teacher, for a person she's learning an art form from, her time spent with her teacher, nothing else mattered. She had a very clear goal that, oh, that person is a threat, that person is a threat to the Rani and ultimately to the kingdom. And that's something that mattered at the end of the day for Kuyili. Then she was very spontaneous as to what action she had to go ahead and take, which is end his life. So I think the spontaneity and yet maintaining that calm in the dire situations is something that I'd like to learn from her, because I, as a person, I am not calm in dire situations. I am definitely the one person who panics a lot, such as when I almost lost the screen share while I was speaking. I panicked. I was like, oh no. So things like that. So one thing that I'd learned from her is definitely her spontaneity in actions.
But then,
If somebody
like
has a
you just
question,
said
then
that you haven't. Yeah, yeah, I'll get
yeah,
back
yeah,
to that. But I'm
right.
just continuing my question. So you said that you didn't find any criticisms on her. So this point can be used by people who are like kind of saying that she's not a real figure, because
Hmm.
if you don't have any criticism on someone, so like even very
So
glorified people in our societies have criticism. So like how do
I
you
think
answer to
that
that?
is why they have criticism, right, Shragnik? Because at the end of the day, these
Because
people
like
who
not
have
it's
been
not necessary
glorified.
that you need to have criticism on someone, but then that becomes a valid point of debate that if someone doesn't have any criticisms on them, then perhaps it's not a real person. Yeah,
But my
go ahead.
question then appears is, why is it that nobody questioned her existence until in like 2014, when a particular CM from a particular party went ahead to, commemorate her on a memorial? So that is something that still bothers me. And why is that in 2012, when Velu Nachiar was commemorated, there were stamps in her name, nobody said anything about Kuyili at that point of time then. So I think a lot of history is influenced by politics. A lot of politics is influenced by history, and I just think that you cannot be an extremist in either of the views, right? You cannot believe that, oh, this is a fact, and oh, no, 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 this happened actually. So you have to maintain that balance wherein you realize that yes, um, either of the things could have happened.
Yes,
Tejasvi had a question.
that makes
Tejasvi.
sense. Before going to that, I just had one
Sure, sure. Okay, Sam.
very trivial observation to make. Yeah. So, like, she is, like, according to the accounts, she is putting herself on fire, and then, like, she's going ahead with that. So, I would not call that suicide bombing. That is more like self-immolation. So, I'm just saying that
I
because
mean,
suicide bombing has some very negative
yeah,
connotation.
because a lot of a lot
That
of
is exactly
historians
what
or
my
like a lot of
question was.
records.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because
Because a
when
lot
you
of
like you talked about extremism in this previous answer, and suicide bombing has a very negative connotation. Like usually it's the terrorists, elite. This is what we associate suicide bombing with. And like Shagnik said, is putting oil on oneself and killing it, killing themselves for the favor of the state, in the favor maybe for patriotism, or because there was no other alternative. Is it fair to call it suicide bombing?
Definitely, I don't think that like it's about whether it's fair or not to call it, but it's also the type of connotations that we now attach to itself, right? When you said that maybe it was for the state, maybe it was for the loyalty to show the loyalty, etc., etc. I think maybe the word in itself can also mean maybe um, the extreme view of what oneself thinks is right, because in present times also when we see such cases of suicide bombings, we go ahead and associate with something negative instantly, right? Because but at the person who is at the other end, for them it's something that they firmly believe in. It's something that they have right over. They firmly believe in that they're doing something for the favor, for somebody, for their state, for anybody at the end of the day, right? So at that point of time I also don't necessarily agree with, because as Tejasvi said, it's a very negative word, or but I also think that negativity comes from the present times, and maybe it's not just about her being, because she did it in 1778. So at that point of time a word like that, or maybe
Her
a notion like
context was
that, did not
definitely
exist. But
different, and like we should
the
not
context was
judge.
definitely different,
Yeah,
yes,
and we should not judge historical events from the yardstick of the present.
based on current, exactly exactly what I said about politics, right? Because a lot of history that is being reinterpreted nowadays is based on the ideologies one is following or seeing in the current times. So maybe that.
Okay,
Somebody raised their hand.
Sudha ma'am was complimenting you, Khushi, and
Thank you.
Amey was raising his hand. Amey, if you have to ask
Yeah,
anything, you can. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add that the nature of suicide attack depends on the target also. If it is civil or it is military they are targeting, because
Hmm.
if uh, the one that happened on 9/11, that was basically targeted on civilians, even if they were rich businessmen, but it was civilians. So you could see it is, you can say it's against humanity, but when you are fighting an army, it's not necessarily you do something against humanity. It's just a tactical thing you do.
Definitely what Shagnik was also talking about. The context also matters, in what context you're saying it. So
But then,
definitely
Amey,
people could have different.
on the basis of what you are saying, last year there was a suicide bombing attack on CRPF Jawans. Would you then say that
Pulwama,
that was just,
Pulwama,
yeah,
yeah. See, the situation is of course critical and sensitive.
because that was done on the military, and if
Yeah.
suicide bombing on the
If we
military is
see from their
justified,
perspective,
No, I don't,
yeah,
Shagnik, I don't think he was justified anything. He was just saying that the purpose of one particular person who's committing this also matters. Of course, there's no justification if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? So that's the conclusion that we draw from the entire debate we had about
yeah,
this
yeah.
word.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mohit, uh, or any of the professors have any questions? If not, then if anyone
Shrikant,
has any
would
further
you like to
questions, then
say something?
yes, ma'am.
Shrikant sir is here, the convener of IQAC, if,
Yes.
if you would like to say something.
Shrikant sir, if you would like to say something, you can go ahead.
Yeah, Khushi. Yeah, throughout
Yes,
I
sir.
was listening to you. It's a quite new thing which you have tried to portray, and it is really required. Though I am not from the history stream, but I think that there are so many things which need to be explored, which remain to be explained. And you have done a good job by taking this historical event, which you yourself are saying that there are controversies going on, whether it's a myth or whether it's a real thing. But unless you explore and explain and research, you can't prove whether it's true or whether it's a false or something, a mythical story. So you have done a wonderful job, and hope that this will impact your research in the history. This will further promote and further ignite your commitment to the subject which you have opted for. And in future, the history, I think, will be benefited. So issues which you raised, both peace, patriarchal society, and patriotism, they may be interpreted by the idioms of politics, but the history remains the history. And the best part is that you have to discover many things which remains shrouded in the name of mystery. So from my side, thank you very much for such a good attempt, and hope to see you a good historian in the times to come.
Thank you, sir.
Thank,
Means a lot. Thank you so much.
okay. Niru ma'am, thank you for encouraging your students for such beautiful things.
I, I think they are all doing a good job, and
Yeah,
we are all learning. I never knew about this person at all, so it's a learning process for all of us. And I thought this is the only means by which, in an online mode, we can bond as a department, and get to know each other. So and they've responded very very well to it. So I must thank them that they are doing an extremely good job. Kushi, it
yeah.
was a
And
very interesting presentation.
credit goes to you all, ma'am, for the mentoring of your students. Credit
No,
goes to all of
no,
you.
Shrikant, I marvel my students that they always give shape to a germ of an idea that we had. Just a thought also when you share it with them, and they very enthusiastically give it a very good shape. So I think I must thank them. Really good
Yeah,
job. Looking forward to more such presentations. And I think the first years are attending a departmental activity for the first time. I'm sure you would have enjoyed, learnt a lot, and hoping that in the coming months you will also come forward to make a presentation. You now you know what it is. It helps, plays a very very important role. In our whole exposure to what college life is all about and the learning that is associated with it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I
Okay.
think that,
In case
yeah.
anyone has any further questions, you can reach out to us on our social media handles, which is Itihāsa DCAC on Instagram. We'll answer for sure and definitely not leave it on scene. Uh, if Neeru ma'am wants to contribute anything more, you can. Uh,
I'm only looking forward to these sessions, which are more frequent, and we don't have long gaps. I think the exams gave that long gap. So now we should be able to, I'm sure one of you can always present at least once in 10 days, we can have that. I'm really,
uh,
really looking
and
forward.
then looking forward to departmental movie screening
Yes, that is also what we're going to
on
do on
Saturday.
Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
with that, we have reached the end of the fifth event of our series. I want to thank one and all present here for giving us your precious time and making this event a successful one. With this, we wrap up the event here and wish you all good health. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Tejasvi.